There is a place on this earth that shouldn't exist, not because it's hidden, not because it's secret, but because every biological fact, every engineering logic, every instinct for self-preservation says nothing should live here. Somewhere above 5,100 meters, above the altitude where most aircraft cruise, above the zone where the human body begins quietly destroying itself, there are 50,000 people waking up right now, cooking breakfast, sending children to school, falling in love, arguing over money, dreaming. This is La Rinconada, the highest permanent human settlement on Earth. It sits in the Peruvian Andes, lodged into the foot of a glacier called Bella Durmiente, the Sleeping Beauty, at an elevation that strips the air of 40% of the oxygen your lungs expect. Every breath here is a negotiation. Every step is a quiet act of stubbornness against altitude sickness, against frost, against the body's own protest. And underneath it all, inside the mountain itself, there is gold. That is why they came. That is why they stay. That is why, despite everything, this city refuses to disappear. Let me describe what you feel when you first arrive here, because the feeling is important. You step out of a vehicle, if you've managed to find one willing to make the 6-hour drive from Juliaca over roads that exist more in optimism than engineering, and the first thing that happens is the ground tilts. Not literally, but your body, which has spent a lifetime on the lower altitudes of the world, simply does not know what to do with this air. You stand still. Your heart hammers. Your head fills with cotton wool. Your vision thins at the edges. And then you notice everything else. The glacier above you, the Sleeping Beauty, clings to the mountain with the resigned patience of something permanent, something that has watched this human circus grow below it for decades without comment. It is beautiful, the way catastrophe is beautiful, enormous, cold, indifferent. The city beneath it is not beautiful. La Rinconada is raw in every sense, raw in its infrastructure, raw in its ambition, raw in the desperation that built it. There are no paved roads here, no sewage system, no centralized water supply. The streets, if you can call them that, are rivers of mud and ore dust in the wet season and frozen gravel in the dry. Plastic bags snagged on corrugated rooftops snap in the wind like prayer flags that have forgotten what they're praying for. But people have decorated their doors, painted their walls, hung signs advertising restaurants named after their hometowns, Arequipa, Puno, Cusco. Someone has installed a small shrine to the Virgin at the corner of 2 alleyways, and fresh flowers sit in a cup beside her, despite the fact that there are no flowers within 80 kilometers. This is the contradiction at the center of La Rinconada. It is both the most provisional and the most human place I have ever seen. Ronaldo has lived in La Rinconada for 11 years. He came from Puno, from a family of farmers who watched their land dry out as the rains came later and later each year. He had a brother who'd gone north to Lima and come back with stories that didn't add up. And then a cousin told him about the gold, about the mountain in the south, where men were pulling fortunes from the dark. I thought maybe 2 years, he says, his Spanish carrying the cadences of Quechua. Enough money to build a house to pay for my children's school. He pauses. He looks at the photograph on the wall. 11 years. He will earn nothing today. He may earn nothing this week. This is because the mine where Ronaldo works, like almost every mine in La Rinconada, operates on an ancient system called Kachorreo. Under Kachoreo, miners work for a mine owner without pay for 23 days each month. On the 24th day, they are permitted to take away as much ore as they can carry. Whatever gold they can extract from that ore is their wages. Some months, the ore is rich, the family eats well, the photo on the wall comes closer. Other months, most months, the ore yields almost nothing, and the equation of survival recalculates itself again. It is a system that is one semantic argument away from slavery, and it is the economic engine on which an entire city of 50,000 souls runs. Gold has always done this to people. It has always found the crack between desperation and hope, and widened it slowly until people will do things that their former selves would not recognize, climb to altitudes that thin the blood and expand blood vessels into something that looks, on a scan, like early-stage stroke. Accept wages paid not in currency, but in the gamble of rock. Live in a city without sewage or clean water in exchange for proximity to a metal that the world, for reasons that are partly historical and partly psychological, has decided is worth more than everything around it. Rinconada's gold deposits sit within a massive quartz vein that runs through the Andean rock at this altitude, brought to the surface by the same tectonic violence that built the entire mountain range. The Andes are geologically young, still rising, still folding, and all that pressure and heat has concentrated minerals in veins that small-scale miners can access with relatively simple tools. A pickaxe, a headlamp, hands. The mine itself, or rather the hundreds of individual mine shafts that riddle the mountain like a termite city, is not a single enterprise. It is a landscape of informal claims, rival ownership, constantly renegotiated boundaries underground, where there are no lawyers and where disputes are settled by the older, slower logic of physical presence. Men work in tunnels where the temperature hovers just above freezing, where the ceiling can be as low as a meter, where the air carries mercury vapor from the amalgamation process that miners use to separate gold from ore. Mercury, liquid metal, beautiful, lethal, accumulates in the body over years. It has no cure. It leaves slowly. The miners know this. Ask any of them and they will tell you, with the flat pragmatism of people who have made a calculation about risk that the rest of the world doesn't have to make. It's the mercury or the poverty. Choose. The women who work outside the mines are called Polaris, and their existence is its own kind of economic poetry. They process the waste ore, the tailings, the discards, with hand tools and bare hands. In temperatures that sit close to freezing for most of the year, they crouch for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time, turning rocks over with a practiced efficiency that looks, at first glance, like something almost meditative. It is not meditative. It is work. Many Polaris are the wives, daughters, or widows of miners. Their labour is largely invisible in any official accounting of what Rinconada produces. They are not part of the Kachorreo system. They are not employed by anyone. They work the margins, literally and figuratively, of an already marginal economy. And yet without them, the families of Rinconada could not hold together. It is their income, small, unpredictable, physically devastating, that fills the gap between what Kachoreo provides and what a family needs to survive. The human body was not designed for Rinconada. This is not an opinion. It is a medical fact, documented over decades of altitude research that began with climbers and mountaineers and has now extended to the permanent residents of the highest cities in the world. At 5,100 meters, the partial pressure of oxygen, the physical force that pushes oxygen molecules from your lung sacs into your bloodstream, drops to roughly 53% of its sea level value. Your body responds by producing more red blood cells, thickening the blood, increasing the workload on the heart. For most people, this adaptation happens over weeks, settles into a new equilibrium, and holds. They become what altitude researchers call acclimatized, not comfortable exactly, but functional, capable. But for roughly 20% of La Rinconada's population, a medical literature figure that becomes, in this context, an astonishing number. The adaptation goes wrong. It overshoots. The blood thickens past the point of efficiency. The heart strains against it. The condition is called chronic mountain sickness, Monge's disease, and its symptoms are fatigue that no sleep can touch, headaches that last for months, a cognitive fog that settles like weather. The children are the ones that worry me most, Dr. Milagros says, without looking up from her files. They've grown up here. Their bodies know nothing else. Some of them, their development is different, the bones, the lungs. We don't know what the long-term consequences are because there's no long-term data. They are the data. She pauses, closes a folder. They're lovely children. They run around. They play. They don't know to be afraid of it. That's either beautiful or terrible, depending on the day. What they don't tell you about La Rinconada, what the poverty statistics and the health reports and the economic analyses cannot contain, is that it is also, against all reasonable expectation, a city with culture. There are 26 schools here, elementary schools, secondary schools, a small university campus. The children of miners walk to class in uniforms carefully pressed, mothers up at 5 a.m. to heat water and iron the creases, carrying the weight of their parents' sacrificed decades in their backpacks. There are churches, Catholic and evangelical both, competing for souls with the pragmatic intensity of enterprises that understand their market. There are restaurants that serve caldo de gallina and ceviche brought up from the coast, improbably fresh at this altitude, the supply chains of hunger finding ways that formal infrastructure never does. On weekends, there is music. Cumbia and huayno blasting from speakers mounted on poles, the city's tension releasing itself in dancing that happens in the cold streets, with a commitment that is, itself, a kind of defiance. And there is the festival of the Virgin of Asuncion, La Rinconada's patron saint, when the city transforms entirely, the streets draped in colour, the glacier behind it forgotten for a day. The accumulation of human difficulty paused in the collective catharsis of celebration. Because here is what economics cannot explain and statistics cannot hold. The people of La Rinconada have made a city, not just a camp, not just a temporary extraction site, a city with memory and culture and music and faith and the particular kind of humour that grows in difficult places, dark and dry and irreplaceable. The mountain was mined long before La Rinconada was a city, long before it was even a settlement. The Inca understood gold differently than the Spanish who came for it. For the Inca, gold was not currency. It was sacred, the sweat of the sun, Inti, the deity at the center of their cosmology. The high-altitude gold deposits of the Andes were known to Inca administrators, catalogued and worked by tribute laborers under the Mita system, a state-organized labor draft that required every adult male to contribute a portion of the year to state projects. Mining was part of this. The gold flowed upward to Cusco, to the temples, to the ears and arms and walls of an empire. Then the Spanish arrived, and everything the Inca understood about gold, its sacred nature, its political meaning, its proper flow through a society, was replaced with a single equation: extraction, volume, speed. The silver mines at Potosi, in what is now Bolivia, not far from this altitude, consumed roughly 8 million indigenous and enslaved African lives over 2 centuries of Spanish colonial mining. The gold deposits of the high Andes fed the economy of an entire European empire. The human cost was so enormous that it may have contributed measurably to the global climate. The population collapse of the Americas after conquest reduced the amount of agricultural land clearing enough to lower atmospheric CO2 levels, a dip visible in Antarctic ice core records. This is the history underneath La Rinconada. Not just geological, also human. The mountain has been mined for centuries. The people doing the mining have, in various forms and under various names, been mining it under conditions that prioritize the metal over the man. The modern city grew rapidly in the 1990s when rising global gold prices made the remote and brutal location economically viable for informal mining at scale. Between 1992 and 2009, the population exploded from a few thousand seasonal workers to somewhere around 30,000 permanent residents. By the mid-2000s, estimates put the number at 50,000 and growing, though precise figures are difficult, because La Rinconada is not, in any meaningful administrative sense, a city. It has no official mayor, no municipal government, no permanent utility infrastructure. It exists in the space between what governments plan and what human desperation creates. Here is the modern crisis of La Rinconada, and it is multiple crises at once. The first is mercury. The gold-mercury amalgamation process that every informal miner in La Rinconada relies on to separate gold from ore releases roughly 35 to 40 tons of mercury into the local environment every year. It goes into the river that runs below the city. It goes into the soil that the children play in. It goes into the air of the processing sheds where women and men work without protective equipment, because protective equipment costs money they don't have. Mercury bioaccumulates in fish, in soil, in human tissue. It damages the kidneys, the nervous system, the developing brains of children. Studies of blood mercury levels in La Rinconada, residents have found concentrations that, in a wealthier city, would trigger immediate public health emergencies. The Peruvian government has formally acknowledged the problem. Several NGOs have attempted to introduce mercury-free processing techniques, including one called direct smelting, which can achieve gold separation without mercury at slightly lower yields. The adoption rate has been slow. The miners who have worked the same way their entire lives, who are already operating at the edge of economic survival, are not positioned to absorb the transition cost of new methods, even when those methods would protect them. The second crisis is the glacier itself. The Bella Durmiente, the Sleeping Beauty, is retreating. Climate data shows it has lost significant mass over the past 3 decades, and projections suggest the acceleration will continue. The glacier is not merely a dramatic backdrop, it is the city's primary water source. As it retreats, La Rinconada's water supply, already inadequate, already the cause of disease outbreaks, becomes more precarious. A city built on gold may, within a generation, face a future defined by water. The third crisis is the simplest and oldest. There is a limited amount of gold in the mountain. Miners who have worked the same veins for a decade report that the yields are declining. The richest ore has been processed. What remains requires going deeper, taking greater risks in more unstable tunnels for smaller returns. The city grew because the gold was good. The gold is no longer as good, and yet people stay. My daughters know this place, Felipa says, spooning soup into bowls without stopping the conversation. The movement's automatic after 15 years. Their friends are here. Their school is here. If I take them somewhere else, Juliaca, Lima, what do they know? What do they have? She sets down the pot, looks at the table. Also, where would I get the money to leave? That's the thing nobody talks about. It costs money to leave. You need money for the bus, for the first month's rent somewhere, for food while you find work. And the work I know how to do, cook, run a restaurant. Here, there are 50,000 people who need to eat. In Lima, I'm nobody. She picks up the pot again. So I stay, and tomorrow I stay, and maybe the year after, maybe then. La Rinconada has 2 seasons, and both of them are difficult. The wet season runs from November through April. The Andean rains come in, not the tropical downpours of the Amazon basin, but a cold, relentless precipitation that turns the unmade roads into obstacle courses of mud and rock. The ore processing areas flood. The corrugated iron rooftops that cover the city provide shelter, but amplify the sound of rain into something that, at night, in a one-room home with a gas stove and a wool blanket, becomes its own kind of weather. The dry season, May through October, brings cold and clarity. The sky at this altitude in the dry season is a specific shade of blue that you do not see at lower elevations. It is deeper, more concentrated. As if the sky at sea level is a dilution of something, and up here, you are finally seeing the original. In the dry season on clear days, you can see for hundreds of kilometers. The Bolivian Altiplano stretches to the east. Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world, itself already at 3,800 meters, glitters far below, like a metal disc someone dropped. The scale of the Andes becomes legible in a way that it isn't when you're inside the cloud. Miners prefer the dry season. The tunnels are less unstable. The roads are passable. The ore processing doesn't flood, but the cold deepens. Nighttime temperatures regularly drop to -20 Celsius, and the wind off the glacier has the specific quality of something that was never warm to begin with. In both seasons, the city smells the same. Iron ore dust, the sharp chemical edge of mercury, wood smoke and cooking fires, the cold mineral smell of glacier water. It is a smell that becomes, for those who have lived here long enough, the smell of home. I keep thinking about that drawing, a child who has spent her entire life at 5,100 meters, who has breathed thin air and walked mud streets and known no other landscape, drawing the glacier behind her house as if it is the whole world, which, for her, it is. What does this place teach you? What does it grow in you to grow up here? The children of La Rinconada are, by most developmental metrics, at a disadvantage. They breathe air that compromises cognitive development. They drink water that may carry heavy metals. Their parents work under conditions that generate chronic stress, and chronic stress in parents transfers, neurologically, to children. The schools are underfunded and understaffed. And yet the children here have something that is harder to measure. They have watched their parents refuse to be defeated. They have lived inside a community that built itself from nothing, that created schools and churches and restaurants and festivals and music in a place where the air itself argues against it. They carry, in whatever way children carry things they cannot yet name, the specific resilience of people who chose the difficult thing and kept choosing it day after day. That is not nothing. That may, in fact, be everything. I've spent a long time thinking about what La Rinconada means, Not in the documentary sense, not what it says about informal mining or climate change or mercury contamination or the failings of the Peruvian state, all of which are real and documented and important, but in the older, harder to articulate sense. What does it mean that humans built this? That they built it not once, not accidentally, but deliberately, incrementally, day after day, each person making the same calculation. This terrible, difficult place has something I need more than I need comfort, and then getting on with the business of living. We tell ourselves stories about human civilization as a project of progress, a gradual accumulation of comfort, safety, technology, ease. Each generation builds on the last to make life a little less brutal, a little more humane. And this story is largely true. It describes most of the world, most of the time. But La Rinconada describes something else. It describes the flaw beneath the progress narrative, the baseline of human endurance from which all the progress lifts off. The people here are not here because they missed the progress bus. They are here because the progress bus does not run this route. The same global economy that determines the price of gold, that funds the pension accounts and gold reserves of wealthy nations, is the economy that keeps the Kachorreo system profitable. That makes mercury amalgamation the viable option, that ensures the cost of safe extraction is borne by the people with the least capacity to bear it. The gold that leaves La Rinconada, estimated at several tons per year from artisanal mining alone, enters global supply chains that eventually lead to jewelry counters in New York and Tokyo and Dubai, to the circuit boards of smartphones, to the reserves of central banks. The journey of that gold, from Reynaldo's hands to wherever it ends up, is a journey that most of the people who benefit from it will never trace. This is not a new observation, but La Rinconada makes it physical in a way that is hard to look away from. But I don't want to end with the economics, because the economics, however important, are not the whole of what La Rinconada is. There is a moment that happens in every conversation you have with someone who lives here, where you ask, in whatever careful diplomatic phrasing you manage, whether they plan to leave. And there is a pause. And in that pause, something happens in their face that is not quite calculation and not quite sadness and not quite pride, but contains elements of all three. They are weighing something. Not just the money, not just the cost of leaving. They are weighing the fact that this place, with all its violence toward the body and the spirit, is also their place. The place where their children were born, where they built something, a business, a home, a reputation, a network of people who would help them in a crisis. The place where they have survived things that, at the time, did not seem survivable. Survival, when it accumulates into years, becomes identity, becomes something you don't leave just because it would be logical to leave. Reynaldo, when I ask him, smiles with one side of his mouth. Maybe next year, he says. Maybe next year my son finishes school and then Lima, maybe. Or Arequipa. He looks at the photograph on the wall. Maybe. He does not say it like a man who will move next year. He says it like a man who has found a way to live inside the gap between where he is and where he intended to be, and has, with the quiet resourcefulness of someone who has had no choice, made that gap his home. The highest city on earth. People wake up here this morning and tomorrow morning and the morning after that. They make coffee on gas stoves. They send their children to school. They descend into mountains. They chip at rock. They carry ore. They process gold. They feed their families on what the mountain allows them, on the 24th day of a 24-day cycle, with hands that have been cracked by cold and stained by work. They are not victims. That framing, the passive sufferers of structural violence, objects of pity and policy, is the one thing they most deserve not to be called. They are people, complicated, resilient, sometimes joyful, sometimes desperate, mostly both at once. People who looked at an impossible place and said, "We will make something here. We will make a life here." They have. The glacier above them retreats, the mercury accumulates, the gold runs thinner, the world keeps buying. And in La Rinconada, at 5,100 meters, where the air is thin and the stars are impossibly bright, and the body argues against every morning, someone opens a door and steps out into the cold. If this place made you stop for a moment and rethink the way we live, then maybe that's the real reason we travel. Not just to see new places, but to discover different ways of being human. Somewhere out there, beyond the highways and crowded cities, there are still communities living by rhythms the modern world forgot. Quiet places, strange places, extraordinary places, and we're going to find them. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe and join us for the next one, because the world is far larger, far older, and far more fascinating than most of us realize. Until next time.